Well, it's been a heavy medal sort of days, we should say, from Hangzhou, where the Indian contingent has so far managed to win 32 medals. And we are still on day 6 of the Hangzhou Asian Games. It's already looking like we have a very good chance of overhauling the 70 medals that we had won last time around in Jakarta in 2018. Track and field athletes, our weightlifters, our wrestlers still to compete. Badminton medals, of course, up for grabs later in the contest. So, hello and welcome to this episode of Game Time podcast. And this is me, Amit Kamath. We are not going to have Mihir Vasavda this time because he is in Hangzhou chasing medals, medalists and stories for us. In place of Mihir this time, we have a new guest, Vinayakk Mohanarangan, who's joining me from Noida. And he's basically been running a lot of our live blogs, tracking a lot of the medals, especially in shooting. Vinayakk, welcome to Game Time Podcast. How have the last 5 days been for you?
Blur, I think is a word to put it. Yeah, thanks Amit for having me. Big shoes to fill in place of me here. So yeah, a little bit nervous about that. But yeah, jokes apart, I mean, he's been doing stellar work from Hangzhou and we've been having a lot of fun reading his stories. We'll talk about some of those during the podcast, I guess. But yeah, it's been busy 5 days. Promises to get busier as track and field events get underway. So yeah, looking forward to what the next few days have in store as well. So this is like the day 6 wrap that we're doing. And as Mihir put it, we are already 32 medals on the table for India. So looking forward to how the rest of the games go as well.
And Vinayakk, one of the things that we've heard a lot in the build-up to Hangzhou is the fact that this time the Indian contingent is going to go for 100 medals. Now, I don't know how realistic that target seemed even at the start of the games or even now. But I mean, 100 ka to pata nahi, but we seem to be doing quite well considering by day 6 we've already won 8 gold medals, which is halfway mark to the number of gold medals we had won in Jakarta, right? Which was 16 gold medals.
Yeah, for sure. 100, it's a little bit of target that, might prove a little too far. But it's too early to speak about that. I'm not really great at predicting medals anyway. So yeah, 100 is something that they've been speaking about as the mission statement on the broadcast from the ministry and, the SAI. All those people have mentioned 100 as a target. But purely in terms of what we have achieved so far, I think it's been some stellar work. More successes than disappointments so far. There have been disappointments, no doubt, but more successes, especially shooters have sort of bounced back from what had happened in Tokyo, I would say. The objective would still be to do it in Paris. Whatever be the end result in Hangzhou doesn't really make up for what happened in Tokyo. But I think it's been a good showing in terms of them competing against China and Korea and all the Asian heavyweights, so to speak, and delivering what has been the best shooting performance so far at the Asian Games is probably been the highlight of the first 5.5-6 days.
Yeah, and when we look down the medal count so far, obviously you would expect the Indian women's team to win a medal. A gold would have been, I guess, slightly expected. You look down all the shooting medals that we won, the 10-meter air pistol men's team gold, the rifle team men's gold, pistol women's gold, things like that. Those medals were expected. The one unexpected medal comes from the sport of dressage, right? Equestrian dressage.
Yeah, unexpected for sure, but also history making in terms of the fact that it was the first dressage team medal ever won by India at the Asian Games. Dressage, you can weigh in a little bit more about what dressage is, but just for me, not particularly into equestrian, but it was quite fascinating to see that event, figure cutting version of equestrian as you put it. So yeah, it was fascinating to see a very good gold medal, something that you might not have accounted for when anyone made the predictions, so to speak, before the game. So yeah, shooting, you would expect a few, maybe even exceeded expectations in shooting in terms of the gold medal, probably. But yeah, it's not a surprise, but this was the dressage medal was a surprise, that no one probably accounted for before the game started. So that was a pleasant surprise.
Right. And just to go back to what Vinayakk was saying, what exactly is dressage? Now, equestrian, obviously, maybe you've kind of figured out that equestrian means horse riding, but there are still three sub-disciplines there: dressage, show jumping, and eventing. And just to explain it to people who are probably hearing these terms for the first time, I think you should just think of dressage as, like Vinayakk said, you can think of it as figure skating, but you can also look at it as a sort of horse ballet, because the whole purpose of dressage is, there is a rectangular patch of ground where there is music playing in the background. There are these very well-groomed horses with their manes tied in tight curls and things like that. They compete, they perform to music. Yesterday when we were seeing the individual bronze medal that Anush Agarwala won, we were fascinated by the fact that the horse and the rider were basically performing to Jai Ho, they were performing to Ma Tujhe Salam and Tare Zameen Pe, the soothing strains of those three musical numbers. So dressage is something where, music will play, the horse and the rider will perform some predetermined movements across 5-minute periods. So that is something where we'd not won a medal, I believe, in 41 years, a gold medal at least, in equestrian. And that is what we've managed to win. And for me, particularly, what made the whole thing fascinating is just trying to figure out the horse's mood, the horse's... It just adds a little bit of unpredictability because, obviously, competing at multidisciplinary games like the Olympics or the Asian Games, there is a lot of chance involved. But in dressage, there is also that additional thing that your horse could be skittish on a particular day. Your horse could be freaked out by so many people cheering you from the stands. So it's not always on the rider. A lot of it depends on the horse. So that brings in a little bit of an element of uncertainty, if you will. So it made for really fascinating viewing. Speaking of fascinating viewing, we've also had events like Wushu, where Roshbina Devi Nauram has won a silver medal, bettering her bronze medal from, Jakarta 2018. So besides that, Vinayakk, anything else particularly stood out for you over these last 6 days? Maybe not a medal, but something else?
Around the medals, I would say, also rowing, like we have spoken about in our videos that we have been doing on YouTube as well on a daily basis. The rowers impressed on the first 3-4 days. The 5 medals that came from rowing were quite impressive. China obviously dominated rowing, they've been dominating most of the games, really. And it was impressive that a couple of medals, at least, the Indian rowers managed to push China, and one was a very close one. Like China pipped India to a bronze, in the last 20 meters or so. That I still remember that in one of the events. Another men's 8 event, one of the silvers that came early on our first medal day. That was also a race where they pushed China quite a bit. The rowers and the sailors too, 3 medals from sailing that we got, that India won in this event. Those 8 medals, I think, those were quite impressive. Like what we have been discussing, aside from all the blogs and, reports that we've been doing, there are some events when, Asian Games come around that take the center stage that usually do not in our regular cycle of reportage, for whatever reason. There are many reasons for that. But, even badminton, hockey, tennis and shooting, these are events that are still in the prime sort of reportage when it comes to Olympic disciplines, but among those, rowing and sailing are not prominent. It's not a sport that we hear, it's not the stories of athletes that we don't hear that often. And there's some fascinating stories of athletes from rowing and sailing. In sailing, there was a story of Iabad Ali, who wanted to become like Milkha Singh. He wanted to run as fast as Milkha Singh, and then he decided, once he got into sailing, that if Milkha Singh could do it on land, I'll do it on water. I found that very fascinating. And, the Rajasthan story that Mihir wrote of the rowers, rowers coming from a state like Rajasthan where, some of them have not even seen water growing up. They've not seen water bodies growing up. And suddenly they are thrown into these massive water bodies where they have to sail or row for their medals. Those are the stories that makes Asian Games and, things like Asian Games and Commonwealth Games special, because it brings them into prominence, right? It gives them the limelight that typically is reserved for other Olympic disciplines. That's really good, and you should all read some of the stories that Mihir has been sending from Hangzhou as well. Fascinating stuff from rowing, and even Nitin has written a couple of sailing stories. All great stories worth our time. Yeah, so bringing those athletes into prominence is one of those things that even I, as a journalist, look forward to every time these games happen. It's really interesting.
Besides besides the highlights, we've had a few, disappointments, a few heartbreaks, a lot of fourth place finishes, obviously. But Vinayak, what maybe, for me at least, the mixed team of in table tennis of Manika Batra and Satyan, that I felt was a little bit of a disappointment. Even Rohan Bopanna, who was defending the gold medal in the men's double tennis contest, he not making it was slightly a disappointment, but obviously he's now made it to the mixed team gold medal match. So at least he's kind of made up for that. Vinayak, anything you found that Indian athletes should have maybe done better?
Table tennis, yes, I think they set the bar quite high for themselves when they managed to win those two medals at the 2018 edition. Those were historic medals in 2018. Table tennis at Asian Games is one of the most difficult fields there is. So they set the bar quite high for themselves by doing that. But there's still a few more events left, singles contention left, and a couple of matches to look forward to still. But there is a good chance that, they are not going to finish on the podium in Hangzhou. At the point of recording, at least that's how it looks. If it changes, then it would have been a big miracle because there are some really tough matches coming up for the table tennis contingent. So yeah, that is something to maybe take stock of at the end of the games to see where the table tennis contingent is, in terms of heading to Paris. Are they on track? Do things need a little bit of course correction? That's something to definitely look forward to. Boxing, a couple of disappointments. Shiva Thapa, I think, is one of the biggest disappointment in terms of the results so far at the Asian Games. He's not had the best of times internationally, but he got selected again for the Asian Games in his category. And despite the chaos in boxing where, the draws have been absolutely ridiculous in some cases, pitting top boxers in the first couple of rounds, leading to early eliminations of some big medal contenders. That's been happening in other categories, but according to most experts, Shiva Thapa had a good draw and he was considered to be one of those favorites to at least reach the final. And you also remember that, boxing has Olympic quotas on offer. So by losing in the first round, I think Shiva Thapa didn't help his case. He's been a great servant of Indian boxing for a long time, has had successes at the Asian level repeatedly. But I think this Asian Games will have to lead to a rethink, at least in terms of where we are heading. The men's boxing hasn't quite had the greatest of times in general. So Deepak losing was again a heartbreak. It was a tough bout that he lost against a former world champion in a different weight category, but still a former world champion. That wasn't the greatest of draw for him. Otherwise, he was probably a medal contender. So yeah, while the women boxers continue to impress, I think the male boxers have a little bit of catching up to do, and that's probably going to be classed as one of the disappointments, at least so far from the Asian Games.
And Vinayak, speaking of catching up to do, we are already on day 6 and we are looking at the medal standings, and we see that the People's Republic of China, the hosts, are already at 179 medals and inching very close to the 100 gold medal mark. They currently have 95 gold medals. India, on the other hand, right now has 8 gold medals and 32 overall medals. So, वो तो थोड़ा सा रहेगा, that disparity. But from whatever we are hearing from Mihir from the ground, it seems as if the Chinese journalists are also very competitive. Apparently, they've been hogging all the spots from the media tribune and things like that. Vinayak, any of those tales that you want to recall that Mihir has been telling us?
Yeah, that was quite interesting, right? When Mihir joined us from Hangzhou for one of the Twitter spaces that you've been doing, I was always wondering, how does a country like China cover Asian Games, right? With so many athletes, so many medals, it's just, to me, it feels like a daunting task as a journalist. We are, covering 30 medals over 6 days and we feel tired. Do they even care about silver and bronze medalists? Do they even get a mention anywhere in the newspapers and websites? Sure. They are 95 gold medalists so far. So I'd be pretty tired talking about 95 gold medalists after 6 days.
Maybe all the bronze medalists go in as... what do you call it? The brief scores that we carry in our
footnote in the medal tally.
Yeah, the brief scores that we carry in our newspapers for cricket games. Maybe their names just go there with the sport. I remember one of my colleagues who had gone to Guangzhou during the earlier Asian Games. He mentioning that when you looked at the Chinese newspapers, you would only see some of the medalists profiled. The other medalists were nowhere to be found. Other gold medalists were nowhere to be found in the newspaper. Forget about the silver medalists or the bronze medalists. So, if you're a Chinese athlete and you win silver or bronze, well, tough gig for you.
Yeah. That's one of those things that has fascinated me about the games. We'd like to know more about that from here when he comes back. Even he was mentioning that he needs to get a hold of a local newspaper and see what they say, see what they write, how much of it is getting covered and all that. So that will be a good story to do post Asian Games when we do the recap of sorts. The tales from Hangzhou on how China was, dominant in everything, right from medals and, media tribune and even food queues that Mihir had mentioned, how it was difficult to get in front of the Chinese reporters in food queues. So yeah, competitive people for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that Mir was telling us kind of stood out about how it's very difficult for him to, just go from one venue to another because, obviously when you go to these multidisciplinary games in a city like Hangzhou, what he said about the city was very fascinating because the technological advancements they've made sure that there are to show off their country has been next level. One of the first stories that Mihir wrote was about this robot who would help you at the mixed media center in Hangzhou. It would give you currency change. It would do plenty of other things for you. So that was fascinating. But Mihir has also been telling us how the Chinese fans are kind of not very accommodating to Indian athletes. And we saw a glimpse of that today when Ramkumar Ramanathan and Saket Maineni were playing in the men's team final against a Chinese Taipei pair. And Ramkumar was particularly rattled by the fact that the crowd kept cheering for the Taiwanese pair. And that's what we've been seeing in pretty much every other venue where fans are kind of ganging up against the Indians, cheering against them. Obviously, they are cheering for the local competitors, but then also cheering very, very vociferously against the Indians. Vinayakk, as we head to the end of this episode, I just wanted to know from you, over the remaining few days, what is it that you are looking forward to?
Yeah, so I think we are recording this at probably a good juncture because the athletics events are going to start after we are finishing recording. So yeah, that's probably like pre-athletics, post-athletics will be a good way to look at the Asian Games in general, I think. So by coincidence, I think that has happened where, athletics is going to bring in a lot of medals for India. Last time it was 20, if I recall correctly, and 20 medals in 2018 when India was still finding their way in some of the disciplines, and some of the disciplines in Asian Games, India have been winning regularly. But now they are at a place where the World Championships, the results are starting to show where, of course, there's Neeraj. Neeraj is in a different class, but he's been winning medals. But we have finalists at the World Championships. Things like that are happening a lot more often. So we are, in general, India as an athletics force have been on the rise. Arguably. So it'll be interesting to see how that reflects on the medal tally. Whether is it still around the 20 mark, or are we going to push maybe the limits there and get in a few more? That's going to be very interesting, I think. Yeah. So looking forward, I think, the second half of the Asian Games is going to be a lot about athletics. And of course, like you said, wrestling and weightlifting will come into play. Hockey medals. Kabaddi is there. Kabaddi is something to look forward to. After the disappointments of 2018, historic defeat. We use historic in a good sense most of the time, but 2018 was a historic defeat in Kabaddi. So it'll be interesting to see how they bounce back. So lots to look forward to in the second half. So yeah, looking forward to how those pan out.
And of course, it must be mentioned that athletics is a sport that even before 2018 has gotten us plenty of medals, because if you look at history since 1951 when the first Asian Games were held, athletics has won Indians 254 medals in the past editions, including 79 gold medals. And there is no other sport which has earned us triple figure medals, totaling all the games. So athletics is something that we have great hopes for. Obviously, a lot of athletes, including someone like Tejaswin Shankar, they've chosen to skip the World Championships just to focus on the Asian Games because they figured that, the Asian Games and the World Championships were too close by and they couldn't possibly focus on the decathlon, a grueling decathlon event over 2 consecutive events. Vinayakk, I think we should also talk about, just in passing, the chess, because that is also something that we'll have great hopes for the team medals after their disappointments in the individual events. So obviously we will see how things pan out in the second week of the Asian Games for India. Currently, as we record, we have 32 overall medals, including 8 gold medals, which is half of the number of gold medals we had won in Jakarta in 2018. We still have a lot of Asian Games left in front of us. It's been very hot, very humid in Hangzhou, but there is a forecast of medals for the rest of the days. So we look forward to covering stories, doing as much as we can on the best headlines from Hangzhou. If you are joining us, thank you so much. We'll be back next week with another episode. Hopefully this time around we will have our regular co-host Mihir Vasavda joining us either from Mumbai or from Hangzhou, maybe from Hangzhou, because I don't know if the Asian Games will have ended by the time we record next week. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a pleasure. So that's all the time we have for today. We'll be back again next week. And if you had half as much fun listening to us talking about sport while we've been doing this episode, well then we've had twice as much fun talking about sport in this episode than you had listening to us talk about sport. On that complicated note, I take your leave.
You are listening to Express Sports by Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by me, Utsa Sarmin. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone who you think will like it and share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcast and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.